As we talk about the joint declaration, India forged a consensus on this declaration at the New Delhi G20 Summit. This came as an early breakthrough in the closely watched summit. As Russia and the West remain deeply divided on the paragraphs on the war in Ukraine, a joint declaration remained elusive at best until the surprise announcement on Saturday. So, the question is, what changed? How did India manage to forge a consensus here? Now, going by the text of the final document, we can see a clear shift in the position that was taken by the United States, the EU and other G7 countries. And unlike last year, the harsh criticism of Russia was dropped. Instead, there was nothing in the text to show that the world leaders are trying to hold Russia accountable. Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar says the consensus had come about due to the stand taken by Indonesia, India, Brazil and South Africa. Now, reports also indicate that Japan has, as the current president of the G7 plus EU bloc, also played a crucial role in bridging the differences here. As a result, we saw no condemnation of Russia in the joint statement. When asked about the shift by the EU and G7 countries, officials reportedly said that the choice they faced was of agreeing to a text or not having a text at all. The latter would have led to unfavorable comparisons with the recent BRICS summit in South Africa. In Johannesburg, Russia and China, they'd agreed to a joint statement that included the reference of national positions on Ukraine, and the phrase national positions was also mentioned in the New Delhi declaration. Reports say Western negotiators chose the option of having a statement to keep the G20 alive as a platform and as an organization. Now, for more on this, we have with us in studio Captain Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, sir. And also joining us on the show is Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, International Affairs Analyst, author and historian. Thank you to the both of you for taking our time to join us on the show here. Now, sir, I'd like to ask you first, what's your assessment of the joint declaration? It's being seen as a big win for India to be able to get everyone on the same page despite all the back and forth on the language that was to be taken. What's your take on this?
To be very honest, it's a huge diplomatic breakthrough. I personally was not optimistic when the conference started that we could come up with a joint declaration because the positions had hardened so much.
Right.
Russian foreign minister had made a statement that if our viewpoint is not taken, we will not be part of that. And the Western countries were not only talking about holding Russia accountable, they were even advocating that Ukrainian President Zelensky should be asked to address the G20 summit, as was done in the case of Indonesia. So it was a huge position, and I think it's India's diplomatic prowess which has actually managed to bridge the gap. This also shows that the Western world realizes that it is important that this conference being held in India is seen to be successful if it has to counter the autocratic regimes led by Beijing or something like that, because there is no doubt that the Western world did make a lot of compromises from their stated position as far as the final declared statement was concerned.
Right, absolutely. Now, Doctor, same question to you. What's your assessment of the joint declaration?
Well, I'd like to congratulate Prime Minister Modi and the Indian team for brilliant work in saving the institution of the G20, which was seriously under question when this summit opened. Precisely, all of Western media identified the text regarding the Ukraine war as being so contentious as to threaten the continued relevance of the G20. A solution was found. I have no doubt that the Indian negotiators were of decisive importance. But let's remember the fact that what you yourselves have just introduced before we came on to the microphone, and that is the role of BRICS. I think that the existence of BRICS and its expansion and the direction in which BRICS is pointed to become a major institution, a platform of global governance, has put pressure on the G20 to retain its vitality and its relevance by compromising and ending the hardline confrontations that marked the BRICS 1 year ago in Bali. This is of decisive importance. And now, just as an individual, you cannot have too many bank accounts. So for the world at large, we cannot have too many platforms like BRICS or like the G20, where the leaders of the major states of the world get together and discuss in a peaceful way what can be done to further development and progress in humanity. So BRICS has been, in many ways, behind-the-scenes influencer of what's taking place at the G20. The inclusion of the African Union is a case in point. The inclusion of on the sidelines of your meeting in Delhi, of the new East-West corridor connecting by train India to Europe, is also under the influence of BRICS and its members. So we are fortunate that the Indian side found solutions that keep G20 relevant.
Right. Well, Doctor, also, as I mentioned earlier as well, there appears to be a tectonic shift in the position that was taken earlier by the United States, EU, other G7 countries. Now, how do you think this switch came about?
I think it was through the influence, I say, of the diplomatic efforts of the Indian side to sober up the United States and its allies, and to let them understand that if they persist in their aggressive pursuit of a condemnation of Russia, which is highly contentious within the gathering of G20, they will sabotage the G20 at the expense of a very big promotion of BRICS. That threat, I think, was decisive in the United States backing down and seeing reason. So I think diplomacy exists precisely for this reason, to help the sides find a way out of difficult circumstances. The Indians have done that magnificently and deserve our congratulations.
All right. Well, now, Captain Wansel, taking cues from what he's just said, how do you think this has positioned India's position as the voice of the global South?
See, we need to be very clear that this G20 summit has established India globally. This G20 summit has been India's movement. It has established India on the global arena. It's something like Beijing Olympic was for China. It has actually shown to the world what India can do and has achieved. So this diplomatic breakthrough is one part. The way this whole conference was conducted was another. And the outcomes of this particular conference, the things which happened on the sidelines, are another. You saw the Global Biofuel Alliance coming up, this East-West corridor coming up through Middle East and Europe. These are all big events which will have huge geopolitical repercussions in days to come. And this has happened because of various factors. Because I think the Western world has realized that they need to prop up India to be able to counter the autocratic regimes like China, Russia, etc. The East-West corridor is nothing but an attempt by West to counter growing Chinese influence in Middle East, because it brings India into this particular region, brings traditional adversaries like Saudi Arabia and Israel together, and connects India to West through a faster route. And it involves huge investments, which would be for the first time a counter-offensive for the West against BRI, which was till now the largest infrastructural project being taken by China. So there are a lot of developments that have taken place, and I think this G20 summit, as I say, has established India on the global arena.
All right. And now, Dr. Gilbert, coming back to you, just for better clarity on this, I just want to understand, what do you think will be the practical implications of this joint declaration going forward?
Well, I think it sets out a path which hopefully will be pursued in other international fora, where the West backs away from its highly confrontational approach and tries to browbeat the global South and other parts of the world to follow its sole understanding of major issues in world affairs. So I think it is a path-setting meeting that will also find reflection in other institutions of global governance. I think all of this is preparing for a major reform of the United Nations. The need for such reform is understood, has been promoted by India and by other BRICS members for many years. Now we see the influence of this trend in the expansion of G20 to take in the African Union as a fully fledged member and no longer as a guest. That is under the influence of BRICS, which is the global South, and in which India, of course, plays a major role. So the ultimate objective and the ultimate achievement of what we saw in the past 2 days in India will be reform of the United Nations institutions to give greater voice and greater democracy to the world as it exists today compared to the world as it existed in 1949.
All right. Well, Captain Alok Bansal as well as Dr. Gilbert. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us on the show with your insights on this. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.